Liam of Carcanne. Chapter 6. Southward. Part 1. I would have been finishing my junior year of college this week, Liam lamented as he moved a plate of bread from the kitchen counter to where Denholm sat at his dining table. Really? The priest had no reservations about letting Liam serve the breakfast he had prepared, feeling like he was always contributing was important to him after all. One more year, and I would have completed my bachelor's in world history. He pulled a chair out for himself and dropped heavily into it. Instead, I'm not much more than a glorified errand boy. Still getting mostly courier jobs? Denholm asked without looking up as he filled his plate with eggs and bacon. It's my own doing. There are other jobs I could be taking, they're just nerve-wracking? It's getting better. Liam helped himself to breakfast. I took a job from an herbalist last week, collecting herbs in the Spletbus woods. How'd you do with that? Denholm's fork paused in front of his face at the mention of the woods. Liam's history with them was sour, to say the least. It was nerve-wracking. Liam borrowed Denholm's turn of phrase. At first, but I just concentrated on the task at hand and managed all right. I didn't have to go deep into the woods. The plants were mainly along the outskirts. No attacks? While the Vargar were still a concern in the woods, and always would be, Denholm was more concerned with the panic attacks Liam had experienced his first days in the kingdom. He hadn't had any recently, but that didn't mean they were gone forever. I was fine, Liam said after swallowing his first slice of bacon. Good. Any other interesting jobs lately? Like you said, mostly delivery stuff. Liam chewed for a moment in thought before suddenly pointing at Denholm with his fork. I did take a card as a guard for a caravan the other day. That sounds promising, Denholm encouraged, surprised he hadn't yet heard about an impending trip out of town. It was just the one night, though, guarding the wagons while everyone slept. Liam poked at a piece of meat with his fork. It was pretty boring, just basic fire watch stuff. But it is a change of pace. Denholm refused to let Liam feel down about the lack of excitement in his current assignments. Stepping out of your comfort zone is always a step in the right direction. Well, it can't all be as exciting as delivering parcels. Liam speared the piece of meat. I've been hearing from some of the church members that you got into a fight the other day. The priest did his best to avoid any fatherly disappointment creeping into his voice. He failed. It wasn't really a fight, more of a tussle, I guess. I was hired to repossess some furniture. The son of the people who didn't pay wasn't thrilled with what I was doing. Liam shrugged. It wasn't a big deal. Mrs. Harper said you broke the boy's arm. The boy? Liam was taken aback by the accusation. He's probably 5 years older than me and a good 50 pounds heavier. He was that big? A smile spread across Denholm's face as he broke out into a laugh. The way she told it made it sound like you were swinging a 5-year-old around by the wrist. Yes, he was that big. Felt like he broke a rib for a while there. Liam winced and reached for his side at the memory of it. Denholm's laughing only grew louder as the visual in his head changed. In his mind's eye, he saw a small boy charging at a sword-wielding Liam and slamming into his side. The sudden impact sending Liam sprawling across the cobbles of Stassen and leaving the child to stand laughing over him. Well, I'm glad you think it is so funny. As the laughter continued, Liam shoved the piece of meat into his mouth and chewed it aggressively. I'm sorry. Denholm wiped tears from his eyes as he regained control of himself a moment later. But I guess, he stopped to stifle a chuckle again, I guess when you get to be Mrs. Harper's age, anyone seems like a child. Well, I guess I should be glad she was looking out for me. Liam rolled his eyes, but a smile crossed his face. Mrs. Harper was a sweet woman. Grandmother to half the kids in Stassen, and great-grandmother to the other half. She'd been one of the first to help Liam out with work when he arrived in town. Oh, there's plenty of members of the congregation that see you out and about, the priest explained after taking a long drink from his cup of water. I hear about people running into you just about every time someone drops by these days. I've seen plenty of familiar, friendly faces while working, Liam agreed. Makes the world feel a little smaller, doesn't it? You know, it does. Liam probed some of the eggs on his plate as he thought of running into his supporters out in the world. Many of them, like Mrs. Harper, had been so quick to help him when he first arrived in town. Sometimes it almost felt like he had a small fan club rooting for him when he came upon them out in the wild, even when they said nothing. Even though he had moved on from needing their help, they were still out there encouraging him in little ways. He had moved on from needing everyone's assistance, everyone save one. Something else is bothering you. Another of Denholm's other great talents, finding the unspoken words left in a room and forcing them into the open. I'm sorry I haven't been around to help the last few weeks. Liam looked up from his plate, a look of personal disappointment written across his face. It doesn't feel right, staying in the woodshed without putting in the work to pay for it. Don't be silly. Denholm scoffed and grabbed another piece of bread off the table. I said you could stay there as long as you need, and I meant it. And we agreed I'd pay for it by helping around here, and I just haven't had time lately. As he spoke, he leaned back and dipped a hand into his belt. Returning his hand to the top of the table, he laid out 3 gold coins. Oh, no you don't. Denholm reached across the table and shoved the money back in Liam's direction. You're not paying me for staying in the woodshed. I have plenty of money to pay with now. It's really not a problem. Denholm responded without words. The furrowed brow and intense look of annoyance said it all. Are you sure? Liam moved to offer the coins again, but the sound of Denholm clearing his throat made him think better of it. Yes, I am very sure. I knew when you joined the guild that you weren't going to be as available as you had been. That was obvious. But did I say something then? Did I tell you to get out then? No. Fine. Liam slid the coins back into his coin purse in a gesture of defeat. And I don't want to find an anonymous donation of 3 gold coins in the poor box later. Liam flinched and let out a sigh. He had just been on the verge of the idea, and already Denholm cut him down. There won't be. Good. You can stay in the woodshed for as long as you need to. So long as you don't need to after August. I will need to fill the woodshed back up with wood for the winter at some point. Out by the end of August. Liam nodded. I think I can handle that. Good. Denholm smiled. I'd hate to have to hire a 5-year-old to come in and evict you before Fall Holy Day. He wasn't 5. Liam grabbed up his fork again and stabbed into the eggs. When they slid from the fork and bounced back onto his plate halfway to his mouth, the priest couldn't help but laugh. For the last month, Liam's mornings had been spent completing jobs he pulled from the guild boards, and his afternoons filled with training with other adventurers in the courtyard. Today, he had made a concerted effort for his morning job to be helping Father Denholm around the church, and had still wound up getting a free breakfast. Liam spent the rest of the morning after the meal washing what he could of the stained glass windows and dusting in the chapel before heading off to the guild hall to put in an afternoon of work of a very different type. It wasn't really correct to call it Liam's training anymore. What had started off as Liam and Otto training in pairs had grown over time to include a dozen or so people. A healthy selection of ranks from across the guild was represented, and all of them looked to learn new skills or sharpen ones they already had. The eclectic collection of abilities and skill levels meant that Liam had the opportunity to learn a dozen ways for handling any situation. He was always careful, however, to make it a point to default to what Otto or Kieran recommended when feeling overwhelmed by the sheer amount of information being thrown at him. Mr. Petter, as well as other members of the staff, seemed to be pleased with the establishment of the small rotating class. As far as he was concerned, anything that drove the quality of the local adventurers forward was a bonus to the hall. If they kept it up, it might even prove to be a new selling point. Employers bringing high-end contracts to Stawson ahead of other halls, all because of a higher quality of adventurer, would be a huge boon to the locals. The added camaraderie and pride the group seemed to be fostering among the adventurers who called Stawson home was just icing on the cake. Liam wandered into the guild courtyard through the large side gate and was welcomed by a collection of adventurers already warming up for the day's activities. He recognized quite a few faces as being there the day before, others he hadn't seen in some time, and there were 1 or 2 he flat out didn't know. Thus was the rotating nature of their workshop. Adventurers constantly coming and going meant there was little consistency to the attendees. Liam returned the friendly greetings he received and made his way over to a cart that had been wheeled out for their use. Laying haphazardly inside was a collection of wooden training weapons and the padded leather chest plates the guild had available for testing and such. The cart had been Mr. Petter's doing, his way of encouraging the group to continue. Also available on the cart was a selection of fruits and some large pitchers of water that one of the stable hands would keep full for them throughout the afternoon. No Otto today? Liam asked the group after sliding on one of the pieces of armor and claiming a wooden sword for himself. I haven't seen him, one of the adventurers replied, followed by several other noises of agreement. It wouldn't be the first time the group would have gone about their business without one of Liam's mentors present. After all, with Kieran out of town the last few weeks, and the other 2 tending their careers, there was no way to avoid their absences. They had lives, after all. Well, is there anything anyone wanted to work on specific, or anything anyone needed help with? Taking a page from Otto's handbook, Liam prompted the others to break off into teams and get to work. Without needing much guidance, the adventurers broke off into pairs and triplets to work through whatever issues had brought them to the group. Liam found himself paired up with a silver rank out of Northern Broadman he hadn't met before. The two spent the next hour working on some basic drills, with the silver showing Liam a couple of tricks he wasn't familiar with. He did his best to log the information away for later use. As the afternoon spun on, the pairings changed over time. As the group recognized the flaws in each other's techniques, people would switch partners to help others they thought would be well served by their experience. Adventurers would come and go throughout the day, every time changing the dynamic of how the group would operate going forward. The fluid nature of the sessions was part of the selling point for any who gathered there. Well into the late afternoon, Liam found himself paired off with the local brass rank he'd worked with in the past. Doretta was a stout combatant whose gifts with healing magics and potions made her unafraid of doing damage to her partners. Because of this, Liam enjoyed the way she pushed his skills. Whenever she was involved, he knew there were real consequences to the sparring, and that helped him focus. He counted himself lucky that, so far, he had yet to need her specific talents. On the other hand, the brass adventurer enjoyed sparring with her junior because he allowed her to go all out. She was well known for her ironclad defense, something that even her talented younger cousin Sidsel was hard-pressed to push through, but she always felt like she lacked in her offensive capabilities. Whenever the two sparred, the onlookers on the patio knew they were in for a good show. "This is the kind of commotion I like to see." A deep, familiar voice rolled across the group as Kieran the Gold approached, his collection of jewelry glistening against his dark skin in the sun as he walked. The appearance of the senior adventurer, after his recent absence, halted all activity in the courtyard. "How is Rihamog?" One of the local silver ranks approached the new arrival and patted him on the shoulder in greeting. "Fine. Nothing I couldn't handle." The grin that spread across Kieran's face lacked none of his trademark confidence. There weren't nearly as many goblins as the report had led us to believe. "A cakewalk, then?" another in the group asked as Kieran made his way through the assembly. "I don't know if I'd call it that." Kieran walked over to inspect the cart of supplies, where he picked up a training sword. "Then what would you call it?" Liam chimed in, drawing Kieran's attention to where he and Doretta had paused in their sparring. "I'll tell you what. I'll regale you with tales of my latest contract over dinner tonight. But for now, I hear I missed out on your graduation while I was away." "Graduation is a little extravagant of a term." Liam glanced nervously around the group. He didn't care for being the center of attention. "I only finished my initiation." "I still missed it, which leaves me curious about something." Kieran twitched the training weapon up and down in his hand as he spoke. "What's that?" Kieran pointed the end of the wooden sword at Liam. "What do you think, Doretta? Has our pet project here improved any while I was away?" "He's been getting better," she nodded. "He even beat up one of my cousins the other day." "That means different things depending on which cousin he beat up." Kieran's grin widened. "He was one of your cousins?" Liam's face paled at the realization. He wasn't all that concerned about Doretta, but Sidsel would return to Stawson eventually, and that could bode poorly for him. "Who isn't one of Doretta's cousins?" A voice from somewhere near the back of the class popped off. It took a moment for the resulting laughter to die down. "What do you think, Liam?" Kieran laid out a challenge while the others laughed among themselves. "How about a repeat of your entrance exam?" Kieran had only been gone a couple of weeks, and Liam's entrance exam hadn't been that long before that. Sure, he expected he had improved some. Going from 0 experience to a month's worth of training, anyone would show some progress. Liam got the sinking feeling, however, Kieran might be expecting too much of him. "I'd prefer it if I didn't get too beat up today." Liam tried to back down. "I wouldn't worry too much about that." Kieran removed his trademark golden jacket and laid it in the cart. "Doretta will make sure we're all right in the end. Won't you, Doretta?" "Of course." "Thanks, Doretta. I really appreciate that," Liam said to her through a forced grin. Quickly, the other adventurers in the group sobered and began moving out of the way of the two combatants. As is the way of such things, the assembly instinctively formed a loose circle around them. It was only seconds later when Liam found himself with his back to the northern wall of the courtyard and only Doretta nearby. Kieran took a moment to shed himself of the rest of his non-essential attire. Rings, bracelets, and necklaces were all placed on top of his jacket in the cart. While Kieran took a moment to warm up, Liam looked to the patio, expecting to see the usual handful of guild members resting and watching the action, and he wasn't disappointed. As his eyes scanned the crowd for any familiar faces, his attention was grabbed by a specific member of the audience, someone he didn't recognize. As the ring of trainees took shape, a woman, maybe a few years Liam's senior, rose from where she was seated under the shade and walked to the edge of the patio. She was dressed in earth tones typical of the clothes worn by many adventurers. Her frame was slight, and she stood taller than most of the other women in the courtyard. What caught Liam's attention was the look of concern on her face as she moved to the edge of the outdoor lounge. "Who is that?" Liam did his best to nod toward her without drawing any undue attention. "Her?" Doretta asked, following Liam's gaze in a less tactful manner. "Yeah. Is she new here?" Liam was far from having met all of the adventurers that based themselves out of the Stawson Hall. Add to that the number of members who passed through this time of year, and it really should have come as no surprise that he didn't recognize her. "No," Doretta shook her head. "She's a healer, on loan from the regiment's righteous. She's been here a couple of months." "On loan?" Liam turned his attention back to Kieran, who was finishing his stretches at the other end of the improvised ring. "I don't know the details," she shrugged. "I think Petter arranged it. It's another one of his schemes to improve the hall, I guess." She looks worried. "Wouldn't you be if two people were squaring off in a ring of onlookers and it was your responsibility to heal the injured?" "Fair enough," Liam agreed just in time for Kieran to signal his readiness. Doretta quickly disappeared from Liam's side and joined the others in the human wall surrounding the two men. Liam raised his wooden sword in an awkward salute to signify he was ready as well. With nothing more than that, the fight was on. The first exchange of the bout was a quick flurry of blows initiated by the Iron Rank as soon as his opponent stepped into range. Not being given a chance to strike first, Kieran was forced to receive several attempts with his sword before replying with his own counterattack. To the pleasant surprise of everyone watching, himself included, Liam was able to repulse the counter and defend against its follow-ups before managing to create space between himself and Kieran. For the second meeting, Kieran bid his time. He allowed Liam his space and forced the junior member to be the one to approach. Liam did so with great caution, keeping his sword up in a position he found easy to defend from. With his limited experience, he was having a hard time trying to keep in mind all of the things he had learned while also concentrating on what Kieran was doing. Add to that the task of minding his opponent's reach, and it all seemed a nearly impossible task to the inexperienced fighter. Slowly, sliding his feet along the cobbles, Liam knowingly crossed the invisible line into Kieran's range. The instant he did, his opponent's blade slipped through the air on a collision course with Liam's left side. Instinctively, Liam's left hand shot out and grabbed at Kieran's wrist, as his right hand shot out to stab at the man's midsection. In a movement as graceful as it was powerful, Kieran rotated his body out of the way of Liam's thrust, only barely missing the weapon's tip. He wrenched his hand free of Liam's grip and only just got his sword up in time to repel a follow-up strike from his student. This time, it was Kieran's turn to feel the need for greater distance, and he fell away from Liam, being certain to leave no holes in his defense for the younger man to take advantage of as he did so. The two took a moment to size each other up before continuing. The next several minutes were filled with even more of these engagements. Back and forth across the stone floor of the courtyard, Kieran and Liam worked at each other, only occasionally breaking through each other's defenses and scoring minor scrapes and bruises. Liam struggled to find ways of pushing through Kieran's defenses, and Kieran himself seemed to struggle with the iron wall Liam was managing to erect between the two. Finally, after several hair-raising moments and blows exchanged, Kieran fell back against the wall of onlookers and raised a hand. "That's enough for now," he said, calling Liam off and extending a hand. "I don't think I need to see any more." The gathered crowd let out a collective groan when Liam lowered his sword and reached a hand out to shake Kieran's. The two shook hands, and the ring of adventurers around them broke apart. Some went back to the sparring they had been committed to before Kieran disrupted them. Others called it a day and headed back to the hall. "You have improved," Kieran told Liam as the two walked back to the supply cart. "It's only been a couple weeks," Liam humbled himself. "It can't have been by much." "Don't sell yourself short," Kieran insisted as he tossed his trainer into the cart and collected his belongings. "When I walked up, Doretta was giving you her all, and you were holding her back with surprisingly little effort. I was still holding back, but not nearly as much as I did during your exams. You earned most of those shots you landed. You've made incredible progress for such a short period of time." "You really think so?" Liam appreciated the confidence, but didn't feel like the compliments were warranted. "Of course," Kieran patted Liam on the shoulder. "You must have been keeping yourself busy while I was away. What kind of jobs have you been taking?" "Mostly courier work still." "That it?" Kieran replaced the gold chain around his neck as well as the rings that typically adorned his fingers. "Aside from a repossession that got out of hand? Yeah, pretty much." "That the fight with Doretta's cousin?" "Yeah." "I'd have thought you were onto bigger things already." Kieran reached up and scratched at his goatee while looking out at those who had continued with their training. Really? Well, yeah. You're starting to move like you've got some combat under your belt. I'm surprised the difference is all from sparring. Well, it is. I'm not calling you out. It's just odd is all I'm saying. Obviously, getting into fights out in the real world is dangerous. But in many ways, it's also necessary for us. Pressure testing your skills in a safe environment like this is important. But the best way to exercise a muscle is in real-world applications. Are you saying I should go looking for trouble? Not looking for trouble per se. You could easily take on some escort work. There's not much work for an iron heading across the border, but there are plenty of people hiring the lower ranks who are headed deeper into the kingdom. You think so? Of course. A little adversity can do you wonders. Kieran nodded. Not to mention, the travel is good for you as well. Get out and see a bit of the world. If there's nothing on the iron board, ask one of the clerks if there's an adventurer whose wagon you can ride in. Wagon ride? Liam looked to Kieran confused. When a lower rank teams up with a higher rank so they can qualify to work a job, it's called riding in their wagon. Gotcha. Before Liam could ask Kieran to elaborate on the process, he was cut off. Now you wait a second! Kieran's voice suddenly boomed out across the courtyard, making all of the adventurers stop what they were doing to look. Liam flinched, the sound rivaling even Mr. Petter's in its sheer volume. Give me a minute. Kieran apologized to Liam before storming across to where two adventurers he had been watching had come to a stop. Liam watched as the senior-most hall member tore into the two copper ranks. Liam was unsure what they had done, but he was certain it had to have put someone in danger to elicit such a response. You know, he's got to be right, Liam thought as he watched Kieran scold the two. I'll never move forward if I keep taking the same jobs over and over again. Liam tossed his training sword into the cart before stripping the training armor off. It stank of more sweat than he'd put into it. He leaned against the cart and watched as the others trained for a while. Kieran continued to berate the two for whatever it was he had found so offensive for some time before finally calming down and teaching them the proper way. For a moment, Liam's eyes fell on the place the healer had been standing. Why hadn't he seen her around before? The question lingered for a moment before Kieran reappeared at his side. The two spent the rest of the time before dinner discussing possible jobs Liam could take to begin seriously furthering his career while safely pushing his current capabilities. Kieran was a wealth of knowledge on how to move an adventuring career forward, and Liam planned on mining that knowledge as much as the gold rank would allow him. Liam of Carcanne was written by Will Hansen. This chapter has been read for you by the author. If you've enjoyed this episode, why not leave a comment? I'd love to hear what you think. Likewise, every like, rating, and subscription helps. Liam of Carcanne is now available as a podcast on Spotify, Apple, Amazon, and all other major podcast distributors. Want more information on Liam or Will? Visit the Wooks Books YouTube channel, Facebook page, or website, all linked in the description. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to seeing you next time.